Time is running out to reach a deal at the COP27 climate summit in Egypt. Negotiations have been going on for almost 2 weeks. Friday's supposed to be the final day when the most important commitments and decisions are made, but there's concern the talks could collapse. Our science correspondent Victoria Gill has the latest.
The brutal reality of climate change. The tiny island nation of Tuvalu is disappearing beneath the Pacific. And in the last official day of these UN climate talks, the issue of loss and damage like this and how to pay for it remains unresolved.
A few developed countries have been blocking, and USA has been the major blocker. It is holding all the negotiations and talk back, and I'm worried because we haven't seen the progress we hoped for on loss and damage.
What richer developed nations want to avoid is a commitment to foot an ever-increasing bill for all of the damage caused by climate change.
Many countries here agree that there needs to be a fund for the destruction caused by floods and storms that are fueled by climate change. But exactly who pays and how the most vulnerable people access that money, those are issues that nations are still wrangling over.
And for Tuvalu, time has already run out.
Whatever happens at the COP this week won't save Tuvalu. The only way to protect our land and our community, given that we are a low-lying atoll nation, is to build more land and build upward. So it's raised land reclamation.
There are just hours left here to reach a deal. And the most vulnerable nations say they're fighting for their lives.
Well, let's talk to Victoria Gill, who's in Sharm el-Sheikh. And Victoria, how great is the danger that they could all leave this summit without a deal being reached?
Well, Karen, we're in everything to play for still in the closing hours of this summit. This is the last official day, but these things have run over before. You know, they did last year at COP26 in Glasgow. Just got a plane flying overhead here, a bit of a metaphor for the causes of climate change there. But there is still a lot to be done, and yet this is the point at which the pressure is on, because they are up against the clock. I mean, we're starting to just get some signals even within the conference facilities here that have been specially built for this conference of the parties, that the facilities will be available later into the weekend. So it does seem like this will go on. But at the same time, we're also seeing signs of a compromise. You know, ultimately, this is a negotiation. And one of the key issues that we were just looking at there in that report is this issue of loss and damage, who pays and how, and richer countries not wanting that to turn into a blame game or a sort of scheme of compensation that just ends up as an endless bill for climate change damage. And then the more vulnerable and poorest countries who've done the least to cause climate change turning up here to say, we need you to step up your efforts to reduce emissions and keep global warming as low as we can possibly keep it, to this target of 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial global temperature average, that critical kind of threshold beyond which we get the most dangerous impacts of climate change. We've seen some signals today in an announcement from the EU that they are prepared to commit to a fund for that loss and damage, and in return are asking more countries to commit to drive down fossil fuel driven emissions, to drive down those greenhouse gas emissions, because ultimately this is a negotiation. So those are two critical kind of sides of that debate, and we are seeing some signs of a compromise there. Ultimately, we'll just have to wait and see. Once those negotiators pile back into that plenary room, we will see that they think that there is a moment there where they'll be able to reach a conclusion and to reach a deal. We'll only know when the gavel goes down, but we're seeing some signals that certainly it'll run over.
Right, OK, so there could be a bit of an extension to the talks to try to hammer something out. And given all you say, Victoria, if there is to be a deal, do we have an idea what its main areas of focus might be?
So I think those two areas, certainly loss and damage is a big issue for this particular COP. You know, they've called this the COP of implementation. Ultimately, the physics of climate change doesn't care about what countries promise. It cares about reductions of emissions. It's only by reducing those emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere that we can actually make a difference to climate change. And the Egyptian presidency called this the COP of implementation. This was supposed to be the to-do COP. So that issue of getting more commitments for countries to really put policies in place to drive down those emissions, that is key. And that is, as I say, the other side of that really key negotiating point about money and those countries that are already suffering the biggest impacts, the most damaging impacts of climate change, losing their homes, having their land swept away. That can't be adapted to. And so really it's a case of how is money accessed in order for people to be able to rebuild their lives, possibly even rebuild their countries.
Victoria, for now, thanks very much. Victoria Gill, as the COP27 conference enters its final hours, but could be extended to try to reach a deal, as Victoria was indicating.